By the time Halloween arrived, Harry was regretting his rash promise to go to the Death Day party. The rest of the school was happily anticipating their Halloween feast. The Great Hall had been decorated with the usual live bats. Ugh. Hagrid was vast pumpkins had been carved for lanterns large enough for 3 men to sit in. There were rumors that Dumbledore had booked a troupe to dance skeletons for entertainment. A promise is a promise, Hermione reminded Harry bossily. You said you would go to the Death Day party. So at 7 o'clock, Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked straight past the doorway to the packed great hall, which was glittering invitingly with gold plates and candles, and directed their steps instead towards the dungeon. The passers-by leading to nearly Headless Nick's party had been lined with candles, too. The effect was far more cheerful. These were long, thin, jet-black tapers, all burning bright blue, casting a dim, ghostly light, even over their own living faces. The temperature dropped with every step they took, and Harry shivered and drew his robes in tightly around him. He heard this sounded like 1,000 fingernails scraping on the enormous blackboard. Is that supposed to be music? Ron whispered. They turned the corner. Nearly Headless Nick was standing at the doorway that was hung with black velvet drapes. My dear friends, he said mournfully, welcome, welcome. So pleased you could come. He swept off his plumed hat and bowed them inside. It was an incredible sight. The dungeon was full of hundreds of pearly white translucent people, mostly drifting towards the crowded dance floor, waltzing to the dreadful quivering sound of 30 music saws played by an orchestra raised a black drapes perform. The chandelier overhead blazed midnight blue with 1,000 more black candles. Their breath rose in the mist before them. It was like stepping into a freezer. Shall we have a look around? Harry suggested, wanting to warm up his feet. Careful, do not walk through anyone, said Ron nervously. As they set off around the edge of the dance floor, they passed a group of gloomy nuns, ragged men wearing chains, and the fat friar, a cheerful Hufflepuff ghost, who was talking to a knight with an arrow sticking right out of his forehead. Harry wasn't surprised to see the bloody Baron, a gaunt, staring at slithering ghosts covered in silver bloodstains, was being given a wide berth by the other ghost. Oh no, said Hermione, stopping abruptly. Turn back, turn back. I don't want to talk to Moaning Myrtle. Who? Said Harry, backtracked quickly. She haunts one of the toilets in the girls' bathroom on the first floor, said Hermione. She haunts the toilet? Yes. It's been out of order all year because she keeps having tantrums and flooding the place. I never went in there anyway. If I could avoid it. It's awful trying to have to pee with her wailing at you. Look, food, said Ron. On the other side of the dungeon was a long table covered with velvet black, and approached it eagerly, but the next moment had stopped in their tracks, horrified. The smell was quite disgusting. Large rotten fish lay there, handsome silver platters, cakes burned charcoal black. They were heaped on the slavers. There was a great maggoty haggis, a slab of cheese covered with furry green mold, and a pride of place, an enormous grey cake in the shape of a tombstone with tar-like icing forming the words. Sir Nicholas Mimsy Poppington died 31st October 1492. Harry watched amazed as the portly ghost approached the table, crouched low, and walked through it, his mouth held wide open, and passed through one of those stinking salmons. Can you taste him as you walk through it? Harry asked him. Almost, said the ghost sadly, and he drifted away. I expect They let it rot to give it a stronger flavor, said Hermione, knowingly, pinching her nose and leaning closer to look at the putrid bagels, or haggis. Can we move? I feel sick, said Ron. They barely turned around, however, when the little man swooped suddenly from under the table and came to a halt midair before them. Hello, Peeves, said Harry cautiously. Unlike ghosts around them, Peeves was a poltergeist, was very reverse of a pale transparent. He was wearing a bright party hat, revolving bow tie, and a broad grin on his wide, wicked face. Nibbles? He said sweetly, offering them a bowl of peanuts covered in fungus. No thanks, said Hermione. Heard you were talking about poor Myrtle, Peeves said, his eyes dancing. Rude, you were about poor Myrtle. He took a deep breath and bellowed, Oi, Myrtle! Oh, no, Peeves, don't tell her what I said. She'll be really upset, Hermione whispered frantically. I didn't mean it. I don't, Oh, hello, Myrtle. The squat ghost of a girl came gliding over, and she was gloomiest face Harry had ever seen, half hidden behind a length of hair and thick pearly spectacles. What? She said sulkily. How are you, Myrtle? Said Hermione in a falsely bright voice. It's nice to see you out of the toilet. Myrtle sniffed. Miss Granger was just talking about you, said Peeves shyly in Myrtle's ear. Just saying how nice you look tonight, said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle's eyed Hermione suspiciously. You're making fun of me, she said, silver tears welling up rapidly in her small, see-through glasses. No, honestly. Didn't I just say how nice Myrtle was looking? Said Hermione, nudging Harry and Ron painfully in the ribs. Oh, yeah, she did. Don't lie to me, Myrtle gasped, tears flooding down her face, while Peeves chuckled happily over her shoulder. Do you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fattle, ugly Myrtle, miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle. You forgot Pimply, said Peeves, hissed in her ear. Moaning Myrtle burst into anguish and sobs and fled from the dungeon. Peeves shot after her, pelting her with moldy peanuts, yelling, Pimply! Pimply! Oh dear, said Hermione sadly. Nearly headless Nick how drifted towards them through the crowd. Enjoying yourselves? Oh, yes, they lied. Not a bad turnout, said Nearly Headless Nick proudly. The Wailing Widow came all the way from Kent. It's nearly time for my speech. I'd better go warn the orchestra. The orchestra, however, stopped playing at that very moment, and everyone else in the dungeon fell silent, looking around in excitement, and Hunting Horn sounded. Oh, here we go, said Nearly Headless Nick bitterly. Through the dungeon wall burst in a dozen of ghost horses, each ridden by headless horsemen, and the assembly clapped wildly. Harry started to clap too, but stopped quickly at the sight of Nick's face. The horse galloped into the middle of the dance floor and halted, rearing and plunging in front of the pack, with a large ghost was held a bearded head under his arm. From the position he was blowing the horn, the ghost leapt down, lifted a head up high into the air as he could see over the crowd. Everyone laughed and strode over to Nearly Headless Nick, squashing his head back onto his neck. Nick! He roared. How are you? Head still hanging in there? He gave a hearty guffaw and clapped Nearly Headless Nick on the shoulder. Welcome, Patrick, said Nick stuffily. Live uns, said Sir Patrick, spotting Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and giving a huge fake jump of astonishment so that his head fell off again, and the crowd howled with laughter. Very amusing, Nearly Headless Nick said darkly. Don't mind Nick, shouted Patrick, his head on the floor. Still upset we won't let you in the hunt. But I mean to say, look at the fellow. I think, Harry said hurriedly in a meaningful look, at Nick. "Nick's very frightening." Ha!" yelled Sir Patrick. "Betty asked you to say that." "If I could have everyone's attention, it's time for my speech," said Nearly Headless Nick loudly, striding towards the podium, climbing into the icy blue spotlight. "My late lamented lords, ladies, gentlemen, and is my great sorrow." But nobody heard much more. Sir Patrick and the rest of the Headless Hunt had just started a game of head hockey, and the crowd was turning to watch. Nearly Headless Nick tried in vainly to recapture the audience, but he gave up as Sir Patrick went sailing past him in the loud cheers. Harry was very cold by now, not to mention hungry. "I can't stand much more of this," Ron muttered, his teeth chattering as the orchestra went back to the action and the ghost swept into the floor. "Let's go," Harry agreed. They backed towards the door, nodding and beaming at everyone who looked at them, a minute later hurrying back up the passageway of the full black candles. "Pudding might not be finished yet," said Ron hopefully, leading the way back to the entrance hall. And then Harry heard it. Rip, tear, kill. It was the same voice that in the cold, murderous voice he had heard at Lockhart's office. He stumbled to a halt, clutched the stone wall, listening with all his might, looking around, squinting up and down the hall dimly in the passageway. "Harry, what are you—" "Is that the voice again? Shut up a minute." "So hungry. For so long." "Listen," Harry said urgently. Ron and Hermione froze, watching him. "Kill. Time to kill." The voice growing fainter. Harry was sure it was moving away, moving towards a mixture of fear and excitement. He gripped him as he stared in the dark ceiling now. How could it be moving upward? Was it a phantom? Stone ceilings? It didn't matter. "This way," he shouted, as he began to run up the stairs into the entrance hall. It was no good hoping to hear anything here. The babble and the talk from the Halloween feast was echoing out of the great hall. Harry sprinted up the marble staircase to the first floor, Ron and Hermione clattering behind him. "Harry, what were—" "Shh!" Harry strained his ears distantly from the floor above, and growing fainter still, he heard the voice. "I smell blood. I smell blood." His stomach lurched. "It's going to kill someone," he shouted. Ignoring Ron and Hermione's bewildered face, he ran to the next flight of steps, this time trying to listen over his own pounding footsteps. Ron hurtled around the whole second floor, Ron and Hermione panting behind him, not stopping until they turned the corner into the last deserted passage. "Harry, what is this all about?" And Ron wiping the sweat off his face. "I couldn't hear anything." But Hermione gave a sudden gasp, pointing down the corridor. "Look!" Something was shining off the wall ahead. They approached slowly, squinting through the darkness. A foot high were words daubed on the wall between the two windows, shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." "What's that thing hanging underneath?" said Ron, a slight quiver of a voice. As they edged nearer, Harry almost slipped. There was a large puddle of water on the floor. Ron and Hermione grabbed him just as they inched towards the meshes, eyes fixed on the dark shadow beneath it. All three of them realized what it was at once, and they leapt backward in the splash. Miss Norris, the caretaker's cat, was hanging by her tail from the torch bracket. She was stiff as a board. Eyes were wide and staring. For a few seconds they didn't move. Then Ron said, "Let's get out of here." "Shouldn't we try to help?" Harry began awkwardly. "Trust me," said Ron. "We don't want to be found here." But it was too late. A rumble through the distant thunder told them that the feast had just ended. From either end of the corridor where they stood, the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs and loud, happy talk were well-fed people. Next moment, students were crashing into the passageways from both ends. The clatter and the bustle of the noise died suddenly as people in the front spotted the hanging cat. Ron, Harry, and Hermione stood alone in the middle of the corridor as silence fell among the mass of the students pressing forward to see the grisly sight. Then someone shouted through the quiet, "Enemies of the air, beware! You'll be next, mudbloods!" It was Draco Malfoy, who had pushed to the front of the crowd, his cold eyes alive, usually bloodless. His face was flushed, and he grinned at the sight of the hanging of the immobile cat.